Banjo Land, Mike Heading here. Just got a free banjo lesson for you today. We're going to be talking about melodic banjo in the key of C. So we're going to go over the basic melodic scale in the key of C and a couple ways to play it. But also in this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit of music theory. So we're going to talk maybe about how to take the G major scale, which you might already know, and modify it very slightly by changing one note to find the C major scale, or modifying it by a note to find the D major scale. A lot of these scales, you can modify one or maybe two notes, and then you know another scale. So we're also going to talk in this lesson about kind of combining that knowledge you already know to find, a new scale. It's just going to be a lot less to remember if you can make those connections in your mind. Okay, the G major scale, if I modify this one note, okay, I can find the C major scale. Rather than having to remember all these different scales and positions, and it's too much to remember, right? So if you can know a little bit of music theory in this lesson, it goes a long way into finding positions that you've already worked on, modifying them very slightly, and then you got a new scale you can work on. So we're going to be talking about the C major scale, playing it melodic style in this lesson. All right, here we go. Let's break it down. All right, let's start breaking down this lesson for melodic scale ideas in the key of C. So before we start breaking down the key of C, let's look at comparing that to something that you probably already worked on, which is the G major scale. So the banjo is tuned to open G, so a G chord. So a lot of times the first scale you learn on the banjo is the G major scale. Or played melodically, and I have another lesson called Intro to Melodic Banjo that breaks down this G major scale. If you haven't learned this one yet, I have another lesson that goes into depth on that. That's a great scale to know, again, because we're in the key of G a lot of times playing banjo. And remember, when we're in the key of G, we can also use a C and a D chord. Those are our common chords. But a common misconception I see a lot of beginner or intermediate players and I ran into this myself, is when we switch chords, okay, if I'm in the key of G and I go to a C chord, do I want to switch to the C major scale? Do I want to stick with the G major scale? What do I do when I actually change chords? Do I switch to a totally different scale? That's kind of a common misconception. What we want to do, at least initially, is stick with the notes of the G major scale. Even if we're playing over a C chord. See how those notes of a G chord, of the G major scale rather, still sound good. I could go to a C and then play those same notes. So when you're playing a C chord in the key of G, you want to use the G major scale. So that's just a good intro. Even if we're using a D chord, let's say, I still want to use my notes from the G major scale. So why are we doing that? That's going to help us kind of stay in the correct key. If I switch to a totally different scale, some of the music theory can it can trick your ear into thinking that you're going into a different key when you really aren't. And as you advance, you might choose to use some of those notes outside of the scale, but a good starting point, if you're in the key of G, even if you're playing over a C or D chord, you still want to use the notes of a G major scale. And you might choose to highlight different notes that we'll get into in this lesson, but just remember that, keep that in the back of your mind, that we're going to use the root major scale. So in this key, G is the root chord, so our G is our one chord, that's the root, so that's the major scale we want to use, okay? Now if we're talking about the C major scale, we can also use a G chord relative to C when we're in the key of C, right? But now C becomes our root. So now we're going to use the C major scale even if we're playing over a G chord now that we're in the key of C. So that might sound confusing, but just remember, what is the root chord, or what's the home chord, the one chord? And that's the scale you want to use, right? So, because you can use a G in a progression in the key of C, or you could use a C in a key of G progression. So it gets confusing, but you always want to ask yourself, what key am I in? So if we're in the key of C, that's the major scale we want to use, and that's going to give us kind of a bluegrass or folk sound to start with. Okay? And it's really important to connect these together because there's going to be a lot of similarities. Because there's only one note difference between the G major scale and the C major scale. So if you can just focus on that one note and how to change it, it's going to be a lot less to remember. You don't have to remember all these different scales. If you can just remember, okay, I can change the C major scale one note to make it the G major, or, you know, vice versa, change the G major one note and it'll become the C major scale. Just a lot less to remember. Okay? So let's go over that same G major scale. And right here is the only note we're going to change, is that very last note. From an F sharp, 4th fret, we're going to change it to the 3rd fret. So that makes it from an F sharp to an F. That's all we're going to do. And the only thing now we have to, the second thing we have to do rather, is change which note we end on, right? So our root note has changed. So it's not the G, now it's the C, 5th fret, 3rd string, or 1st fret, 2nd string. And notice how that changes how those notes work together. So if I go, now it sounds like a nice lick. So ending on that C note makes that F note suddenly work and sound really good. So the only thing I'm changing is that one note and then what note I'm ending on. So I'm changing two things. I shouldn't say I'm changing one thing. I'm changing two things. The note I end or start on, and then the note I end on. So again, if you can think of that small change between the two scales, it's just a lot less to remember because I'm really just changing that one note. And then what note I end on. So that's a small thing. So remember, all I have to do is to change from the C major scale to the G major scale, is change that F to an F sharp. A lot of people start with the C major scale, especially if you're playing other instruments. It's not as common with banjo, but if you play piano, you might have heard the C major scale is all the white keys, right? So that's a very good one to start with because it has no sharps or flats. It's all regular notes. So, and now I'll teach you how to do it all the way up the neck. But just remember that, so if we change from the C major scale to the G major scale, we're just changing that one note. If we want to change one more note, we can get to the D major scale. So this is, again, another cool trick you can do. So if I want to get to the D major scale, all I have to do is change my C to a C sharp and then end on a D note, and I've got the D major scale. So I'm just playing with those same notes and then ending on a D. So that's all I'm doing there. It's just playing with those same notes and just experiment with some different right hand rolls. I'm just kind of working out of these positions and then trying to end on a D. So again, with just changing those two notes, now I know 3 scales, right? So not too hard there. That's where a little bit of music theory can go a long way. So just remember to change to a different scale. A lot of times all you're doing is modifying one note. You're sharpening it, raising it a half step, or sometimes flattening it, lowering it a half step. One more scale you could do is if we change our G to a G sharp, either at the 6th fret or 6th fret on either the 5th string or the 1st string. That would be like an A scale. And that one you can't use the open G, but so again, all I'm doing is now I know 4 scales, just staying in this same position and just modifying a couple notes. So again, I don't want to get too much into the music theory in this lesson, but basically kind of keep in your back pocket to learn a new scale. A lot of times all I have to do is take an existing scale I know and modify one note. And again, if you can kind of connect all these things in your mind, you know, the different scales, it's just going to be so much less to remember. If you have to remember all these different scales and all these different positions, you know, it's kind of information overload, I found. If you can connect the stuff you know together, okay, the C major scale is the G major scale with just one note different. I don't know, I found for me it's just a lot less to remember. Okay, so let's go back to the C major scale. So again, we're going to start on the 5th fret. You can start either with your first or second finger. I'm going to use my second finger to start. I'm going to do the 5th fret on the 3rd string, open 1st string, 5th fret 2nd string, and then 3rd fret 1st string, open 5th string. A lot of times I just like to start with the first 5 notes of a scale. That's good practice. It's very easy to hear it. It's good practice for looping it. It also sounds like dueling banjos if you've heard that song, but that's great practice. You can do it with the G major scale too. So that's a lot of times I just like to start with the first 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay? So that just gets that kind of you practice your ear training there. You're also kind of working your right hand there. But let's get the rest of the notes now. So right here you're going to use the 5th string to travel all the way up to the 10th fret on the 2nd string. You're going to put your 2nd finger right there. 1st finger on the 9th fret of the 1st string. And then you're going to wrap your thumb around and grab the 10th fret of the 5th string. And then if you want one more note, you can use your pinky up on the 12th fret of the 1st string to get you one higher note. Use your 5th string to travel. Again, what I like to do is go one note higher and then you can create that loop. And again, very rarely would you just run straight up and down the scale in kind of real life music, but it's good practice. It's good just practice getting the positions down. You know, you have to make that shift. That's where using your 5th string really comes in handy. And that just takes a certain amount of practice. But once you get it down, you can practice, you know, mixing the notes up. Basically trying to practice landing on this 5th fret for my ending note. And again, you're not going to come up with something amazing right off the bat. You have to do a lot of kind of hunting and pecking, playing around with different right hand rules. I'm not really thinking of what notes I'm playing. I'm thinking of the timing and the positions I'm using. I'm just trying to get comfortable using these different positions and seeing what I can come up with and get comfortable. And again, landing on the right note to end. Because you can do the fanciest lick in the world, and if you end on the wrong note, it's not going to sound good. If I end on the wrong note until I play that last correct note, you know, the lick doesn't sound complete. So a lot of times what I'm doing when I'm kind of playing around with these positions and licks, I'm trying to land on the correct ending note. It's kind of like sliding into home plate. You know, if you get that last note, you're safe, right? So that's kind of what I think of. So just work these different positions. You know, and that's where your right hand dexterity can get better as you improve, and you'll be able to play more advanced melodic lines. But the first thing is just getting familiar with these positions. Especially with that thumb wrap, that can be tricky. Again, I'm just trying to land on the C or land down here. You can do it down here as well. You know, so you could do something like that. Okay? So now let's look at a couple different ways to play that scale. So one way is you could grab, instead of going, you could grab that note down here as well if you're like down in your C chord. Again, just get the first 5 notes to start. Another thing you can do is if you're coming from more of a Scruggs way is if you're up here, that kind of thing. see if you can do like a melodic style lick to get back down. Something like that. Again, a lot of it just depends on where you end. You know, get the correct ending lick. And you know, you just have to start somewhere. I'm just kind of seeing what I can come up with. I'm kind of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall here to see what I can experiment with. You can even try sliding all the way up. Something like that. Could be good practice. Okay, let's look at a couple other ways to play that C scale. So another way you could do it is doing it this way. And then shifting right here. So you shift from 5 and 3, shift up to, what is that, 8, 7, and 9, and then use your pinky. And that's good because it takes out the open string, which can be valuable. You don't always want to use open string. Sometimes it can be valuable, but if you switch keys, knowing this closed position scale can be valuable. That's another way you can do it. Another more advanced way would be and then grabbing this way up here. That one works good if you're going further up the neck because we're going to travel faster. So we do 5th fret, open D, and then grab this 5th fret on the 3rd string right here at the 9th fret, and then 6th fret, open 5th string, way up to the 14th fret, and then thumb, and then 10, and then way up here if you want to grab the next note up. That's good stretching practice. It's also good right hand practice coming down like that. So follow the tab closely there. Another thing you could do is do like a basic C, F, G progression with some melodic licks. So you could do something like, and then you're basically going to this F chord right here. But a common kind of melodic way to do it would be take your 2nd finger, put your 1st finger on the 5th fret, and then put your 3rd finger up on the 7th fret of the 5th string. That can be a cool kind of F chord lick. If we shift that whole position up 2 frets, that's a G, same melodic style lick. And then you can either grab your pinky to get the high C, or shift up again into your regular C melodic scale. And again, if you don't get it perfect, don't worry about the transition. You know, you can clean up the transitions as you get better. So let's try that again. So you could do something like, another thing that's cool about using melodic scales is that the major scale in C will also work for its relative minor, which is A minor. So those same notes will work also for an A minor, which is another chord you'll see a lot of times in the key of C. So again, if we wanted to shift it to a minor chord, all we would do is kind of choose to highlight that A note a little bit more. Something like, you know, if you've played like Jerusalem Ridge or something like that, or there's a lot of A minor banjo songs. So again, it's all the same notes from the C major scale. We're just now shifting the root note again to the relative minor. So again, connecting all these ideas in your head is super important because it's just going to be so much less to remember if you can, okay, I can use my C major scale for the relative minor, for A minor. Okay, I can use my, when I'm in the key of C, I can use my C major scale over F, over G, over A minor. I can use all those same notes, you know, over all four of those chords. I mean, you could play 10,000 songs in the key of C and never have to learn another chord other than those four chords. So, you know, not that you'll never have to use a different chord than those ones, but those are going to be the most common four chords in the key of C, especially if you're playing bluegrass, okay? Let's look at one more thing, and I'll refer you to another lesson I did called Movable Melodic Scale Patterns. But basically, there's another kind of movable C chord lick that I'll use a lot. It's based off the same position that we used for the F and the G chord, but now we're going to do it way up at the 13, 12, and 14. So that's like a C chord. We're just playing those three notes. And then we're going to move up 2 frets with your second finger, and then go into this position. So let's practice moving from those two. Playing around with the right hand. Don't worry about if you hit some other strings by accident. Again, you're just trying to get the positions down. So one more is if you slide now your third finger up to, what is that, the 17th fret. Put your first finger on 15, and then your second finger way up on 17 on the 5th string. Just basically grabbing 3 note patterns in the scale. So I have 3 notes, 1, 2, 3. Now I grab the next 3 notes up. 3 more notes. 3 more. And then you can get your high C way up here, your last fret. And that's really tight quarters up there. You can basically keep moving this scale back down. And again, check out that other lesson I did, Movable Melodic Scale Pattern. It's the same shape. There's a pattern that we can use, and again, once you get familiar with that, you can basically play movable notes. There. Okay, so start by just working around with that general position. Get the scale down in the open position. And then next, kind of experiment maybe adding some other chords. So you could do like a run. Maybe go to an F. And then try a run. And then maybe a G. What I like to do pretty much right away after I get the basic scale down, start adding some real chords. Because I found too, you know, if you can just go, you know, straight up and down the scale, while that is good, great practice, it's not that applicable in real life. So you pretty much, as soon as possible, start adding some chords, right? And again, I'd really encourage you to experiment with these scales and ideas, because it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to think you can't come up with stuff. You got to try a lot of stuff. You got to throw a lot of stuff at the wall. And it's not all going to work, right? You have to kind of figure out how, okay, I got to cut a corner there, or get back to this note, or move faster. And part of that is just the experiment process. But the more familiar you get with the scales and the right hand notes and the positions, the easier you're going to be able to get yourself out of a tough spot and explore some new territory. And again, remember that you can use the C major scale for A minor, you can use it for an F, you can use it for a G chord, all when we're in the key of C. So you can modify that one note and play all these scales now in G as well. I mean, you can take that same idea and again modify that F. If I modify that to a F sharp, now I've got all those same scales I can do in the key of G. Modify the C to a C sharp, now I've got all the scales I can do in D. You know, so you can take a lot of these ideas, and if you know just a little bit of the music theory, you can take the knowledge that you've already learned and apply it to a new situation. Okay, all I have to do is change that one note, and now all those licks become G licks. Okay, that's pretty easy. I can do that. So again, make those connections in your head of how to change one scale to another, and it's just going to be so much less to remember for you. All right, download the tab and practice through some of these scales, and hopefully that helps you out. All right, good luck.